Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Town Manager Download, a podcast about local government and the town of Shrewsbury. I'm Kevin Mizikar, the Town Manager of the town of Shrewsbury, and as always, I'm joined by Communications Coordinator Taylor Galusha.
In today's episode, we are going to be joined by Christina Ordung, the Director of Human Resources in Shrewsbury, to discuss the transformation of the town's human resource system over the past few years. We will discuss two key aspects of this transformation. The first is the transition from a longevity-based compensation system to a performance-based system. The second is the modernization of our benefits system to ensure the town is a preferred employer in the region. There's so much to talk about with Christina that we will discuss these two aspects of the transformation over 2 episodes.
I'm really excited for both episodes, to be honest with you.
We haven't done one of these in a while.
Yeah, it's kind of been the centerpiece of, or a critical centerpiece of what we've done over the past 7 or 8 years with the town, and it's been a long progressive evolution that I'm excited to dive into and let folks see a little bit behind the scenes. There's a lot of things that we've done with the strategic plan that have been very public facing, but this is just as important and critical and a little further behind the scenes. So look forward to our conversation with Christina. What's been going on with you?
Honestly, not a lot. I kind of hibernate in the winter, but it's supposed to be very nice this week, so gonna take more time outside to try and walk on my lunch break and whatever other time we get that's nice during our fake spring.
Well, it's been a great time to hibernate the past few weeks, at least since we've done the last episode, with a lot of cold temps and other undesirable winter things going on. So we'll just leave it at that. What's up in the Shrew?
We have so much going on in the Shrew, especially the next couple months. I feel like everything's starting to pick up again.
Right.
We say that, but it's already been so crazy and busy since probably last town meeting. But I'm excited that our 7th edition of the Shrewsbury Connection quarterly newsletter should be arriving at home starting this week. So there's a lot of good stuff in this newsletter, including recreation strategic plan survey and upcoming events for the spring, hazard mitigation plan survey that the planning and economic development department and emergency management are working on, sign up for the resident academy, which I think we're both very excited that I think we found a model that's going to work really well for people and for staff. So the link for that will be up there. And then May town meeting action dates and so much more stuff. But those are I think the high points for me.
That's great. The select board has voted to set a special town meeting for April 14th, which will be a single article special town meeting for the municipal facilities optimization project, which incorporates renovation and expansion of the DPW facilities at South Street and a renovation, mainly mechanical system upgrades and other improvements like bathroom improvements to the town hall. Not an expansion there, but just taking the opportunity to renovate some of the space and utilize those two projects together so we don't have to add on to the town hall. So that was kind of the vision that the board set about a year ago, and we've done a lot of work to get here. So thanks to the committee and staff who've worked really diligently over that time period to get us this far. And a lot of work's been done since the special town meeting in the fall to get us almost to the 60% design, which will be there in the next 6 weeks before the special town meeting. That's been set for April 14th, and we're definitely spending a lot of time preparing for that. There's community information sessions that are going to be held on March 19th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. and on April 2nd from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. And then after the special town meeting, because we do anticipate requesting a debt exclusion ballot question on April 23rd from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. So more than likely we're going to hold at least one, if not both of those sessions at the facility at South Street so folks can see the current conditions there and get a sense of how we're going to transform the space. So we're looking forward to that community engagement, which we always do.
Speaking of, I think another great, project that myself and Teresa Flynn from the select board, with the support of Mark Sarah and Liz from Shrewsbury Media Connection, we worked on a town meeting member information video. We had a group of town meeting members come and volunteer from different precincts to participate and kind of talk about the different aspects of town meeting. It's a nice, short and quick video that kind of gives a high-level overview. Again, we're just trying to make it as approachable as possible for people to get involved. And so thank you to those town meeting members and anyone that watches the video and likes it, I guess.
Yeah. No, yeah, thanks for the town meeting members for taking their time. Taking time out of their days to really help get others involved. It's really important. Get all the town meeting seats filled through the elections coming up. So, and with all that in mind, we have the budget that we've been working on, and we produced the first iteration, which is known as Fiscal Projection 1 for the fiscal year 2026 budget that will be considered by town meeting in May. We released that the middle of last week, and we start to go through the really deliberative public-facing part of that. So we'll make a couple preliminary presentations at the select board meeting and the finance committee meetings the week of February 24th. And then we'll begin the robust public hearing process, which takes part over about 10 hours on 2 separate days near the end of March. So we're really in the heart of the budget process, the public engaged part of the budget process, which is always a great opportunity for folks to learn more about the budget and our financial plans and policies as we move into the next fiscal year.
Yeah.
So
the start of, I don't know, we're like in the middle of it, but it feels like it's like the start of a new year all over again.
Yeah, we're really focusing down into what we need to do for the annual town meeting, and starts its own little system throughout the course of the year that we'll focus on here for the next few months. And I'm sure we'll be talking about it at the outset of most of our episodes
Probably
in the next few months here. So, but before we fast forward, we got a really fun, important episode to talk about today.
We do.
We'll have Christina Ordung on just in a minute, and we're going to talk about just really, I don't know how else to describe it besides an organization transformation, and we're going to talk about the human resources component of that. When I started in Shrewsbury in July of 2017, we didn't have any dedicated human resource professionals. Every department was responsible for some aspect of their own recruitment, retention, posting of open positions. There was some centralization through the town manager's office, but again, we didn't have a dedicated human resources department. And we, of course, talked about the evolution and creating an HR department in some of our episodes. Christina has previously been on. So if folks are interested in learning more about her and the creation of HR in town, they can go to episode 7 of the Town Manager Download and get a refresher there. But looking back over those 7 plus years, we've talked a lot about the strategic plan and how we've focused our resources and our approach into the strategies that residents have requested as they engage with us in that strategic plan. But there's been a lot that's gone on behind the scenes to kind of align that new public-facing approach with how we operate from an administration of finance and human resources system. So the discussion that we're going to talk about today will be segmented into 2 different parts. One is kind of the nuts and bolts of how we've created a performance-based system for our employees to really provide incentives and higher level of engagements and connect them into the strategic plan. And then what we've done for employees to make sure that we're a responsive, modern, competitive employer, not only in local government, but, with all of the private sector opportunities that there are in the region, to the extent that we can compete with any of those. So when we've gone through the strategic plan, we've talked a lot about goals, and we're certainly going to talk about that today on how employees set goals and think about goals and how that ties into the way we go about running human resources within the organization. Because it really fundamentally comes down to how we tying the work of each and every employee on a day-to-day basis to, geared towards the outcome that we've set through the strategic plan. And the culture that we need to create in order to keep employees engaged and excited and really focused on continuous improvement. And it's mutually beneficial, because if we have engaged employees and they're excited about what they do and things are constantly evolving and they can see those outcomes, hopefully they'll stay with us longer. And, we'll build our talent pool from within to the greatest extent we can. So we've also thought a lot about not just how employees work to serve residents, but how can we really provide the appropriate level of incentives, compensation, and other non-monetary benefits to them to keep them really engaged with us, satisfied with the work environment that they're in, and performing at the top level that we really hope and expect that they do, and certainly do each and every year. So really proud of that. I'm really proud of all this work that we're going to get to talk about, and excited to welcome our Director of Human Resources, Christina Ordung, to the Town Manager Download. Welcome, Christina. It's good to have you back on the Town Manager Download.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So why don't you take the opportunity, folks can go back to episode 7 to get a little more background, nuts and bolts on HR in Shrewsbury and your background, but why don't you provide us a quick overview, talk about your tenure with the town before we dive in today's episode.
All right, thank you. I'm Christina Ordung. I'm the HR director with the town, and I've been with the town since 2018, so we're running on almost 7 years with the town. And my responsibilities include the recruitment process, the entire employee life cycle, all of the benefits, policies, and procedures that support our employees, classification and compensation, and managing personnel matters, to name a few.
Great. So what have you been up to since you were on Town Manager Download last time? Last year or so's activities with HR, what have you been working on?
So I'd say the routine things. We've been hiring, training, managing different personnel matters, but we've also been focusing on some different bigger initiatives that are exciting. To name a few, we've been updating the employee policy manual. We rolled out the first one in 2020, so it's time to take another look at it and make sure it's updated, comprehensive. We've been exploring improvements on how we use our ERP system, Munis, just making sure it's more efficient and effective for our needs in 2025. And lastly, we've been developing a multi-year staffing plan to help us align resources for the future.
Awesome.
So, Christina, when you were on last time and at the beginning of the episode, I mentioned that you were the town's first human resources professional position in 2018 when you were hired, and we've worked on so much over the past few years, not only building the department itself, but also really HR playing its role in the transformation of the overall organization into utilizing the strategic plan as kind of our focus point and how we serve residents. But there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes day to day to make sure everything is aligned. And you've played such a critical role in overseeing that part of the transformation. So we're going to break this up into 2 episodes today, and we're gonna talk a little bit first about moving us into a performance-based system, how we compensate employees, and how we run kind of that segment. And then later on, we'll start another episode and we'll talk about the benefits and some of the other things that we do to make ourselves a really attractive employer. So let's start kind of with the nuts and bolts of the town's compensation system. What the philosophy was when you started in 2018. So what did that look like in 2018?
All right, so I started at a really exciting time because we were taking a look at our classification and compensation system. We had recognized that our structured step and grade system, very similar to civil service, where your compensation is based on your longevity with the town, was outdated. It was being managed by a very part-time volunteer personnel board where they would review the town's pay periodically and make sure that our wages were in line with other local governments, mostly surrounding the town. We considered competitive pay, meaning being at the 50 percentile of our regional average. So we paid more than half of our comparable communities and less than half of our comparable communities. So what that meant in practice is that employees could very easily find higher wages in near communities, which made recruitment very difficult and retention nearly impossible. The other really difficult piece was that our step and grade system created a wage growth issue because most of our employees hit their maximum salaries outside of let's call it a 2% cost of living adjustment in just 3.5 years. So those steps looked like a 4.5% increase over that 3.5 year period. We had 5 steps in that time. And then you met your max compensation. So we recognized we needed to overhaul this system, and we were paying under market. It was impossible to recruit and retain. So we underwent a huge project.
So if I'm hearing you right, it was this really classic or like legacy, almost civil service like system where, someone was a particular title and they may be at, grade 4, and then they're at step 3, and you kind of go across the chart and be like, oh, this is the compensation. And never did we vary from that, right? You're in that range. And then as you said, I think 3.5 years it took to get to the top of that system.
Yes.
And at that point, how were employees' wages adjusted? How do we go about it on an annual basis at that time?
So if I was hired as a new town employee, I started at step A. In 6 months with satisfactory performance, I moved to step B. A year from then, so 1.5 years into my tenure, I moved to C. Again, 2.5 years, I moved to D, and then 3.5 years, I moved to E. So those were 4.5% adjustments, and typically each year on July 1st, employees receive, we'll call it a 2% cost of living increase. It did vary over the years. It still continues to vary, and that's based on the consumer price index and what our comparable communities are doing for cost of living increases.
So you moved to step E, and then it was no consideration of your performance. You assumingly met the expectations of your position, but you basically just got something for a cost of living adjustment. Basically, in some ways, telling employees that they're at their maximum compensation and now we're going to keep you current from a cost of living standpoint. So you can keep up, but really that was the greatest extent of our compensation system.
Yes, that's right.
So let's fast forward to the end real quick. So we've talked about this. We're now using a performance-based system to adjust employees' compensation on an annual basis. But a lot had to happen from then. We still use what I'll call a traditional classification system.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about what the classification system is, and then we'll dive into it from there?
Absolutely. So our classification system is a way that you determine how you compensate employees. So we'll talk about the details of our classification and compensation study, but we ended up with 11 grades that's broken into 3 different tiers. We have department heads and managers in grades 9 through 11. We have professional technical staff in grades 5 through 8, and we have administrative and professional staff in grades 1 through 4. The way that your position falls in a classification is based upon a job analysis questionnaire. That job analysis questionnaire is a series of questions that's based upon 9 different factors. It includes education, experience, your involvement in policy making, the impacts of your decision making, and if you were to make an erroneous decision, what your work environment is, if you supervise staff, among a few other items. And each one of these selections that you make has points that correlate with it, and how you score on your job analysis questionnaire, or how your position scores on the job analysis questionnaire determines which grade that you fall in, because each grade has a point range. So using this system and having this systematic way of classifying employees make sure that we have equity in how we compensate our employees.
So that's kind of internally facing. So
Yes.
if you're a department head position and you supervise folks and you're responsible for the outcome of an entire department, that puts you in a certain place in our classification system versus an individual performer who, may be responsible for programs but not people, and then folks who are responsible for just kind of the direct work that they do on a day-to-day basis in serving residents or their own tasks at hand. So that kind of walks you up and down the chart there. So how did we make those changes? What process did we use to get from, we always had a classification system, but let's start to interweave the compensation parts into that.
So we worked very closely with a consultant on this project. And one of the first steps that this consultant took was having conversations first with us about what our end goals were, and then speaking with our employees individually to help understand what their positions entailed. You can imagine that a DPW director position is comparable in other communities, but when you get into some other positions, their responsibilities can vary hugely from one community to another. We found that all of our employees wanted to participate in this process. So some of our the conversations that our consultants had were one-to-one, and some of the conversations that they had were in large groups, such as with our administrative staff. And this allowed our employees to peek behind the curtain to understand what was going on, what the town was doing, and to make sure that their responsibilities were properly conveyed. And that's how we began really figuring out what our new classification system would look like before compensation really even came into play. From there, they also rescored all of our comparable communities. So traditionally, Shrewsbury had been looking at communities that were located near us. We were really favoring proximity, but our consultant brought in several other factors. They included our population size, the size of our budget. They included proximity and several other factors as well. And we had communities that we would have never thought were comparable to us brought into the mix. And then from there, they completed a compensation study for each one of our positions, and that allowed them to collect a huge amount of data and give us some options to select from on where we wanted our compensation to lie. And that is how we defined our new compensation philosophy. So the town opted for an open range merit plan, which means that we have a minimum and a maximum for our ranges for each grade, but we don't have those sort of steps in between because we move through that with our performance appraisal system. And we chose at that time to compensate our employees at the 55th percentile. So we went up 5 points from where we were before to pay more than 55% of our new comparable communities and less than 45% of the others.
Right.
What are some of our new comparables?
That's a good question. Comparing the two, I can tell you that some of the boroughs towns dropped off. And I would say Chelmsford was added in. I can get you a better list.
I mean,
curious.
I think we fell into, I think, a challenge that a lot of cities and towns faced was it's kind of easy to use the communities immediately surrounding us. In some ways, that's really good, right? Because they are well known to kind of taxpayers in your community. You can kind of get a sense for the housing stock, the commercial stock within those communities. In some ways, it makes sense, but a community with our characteristics, we're so much larger in population than many of our surrounding communities, and then Worcester, right, is even different than us. So, I think we went to a really quantified points-based system, and that looked at the budget, the total budget, the total number of employees, the type of governance model. So I think we actually found a better fit, although those communities may not necessarily just be the ones that are in our region.
Right.
And I think it did push us a little bit to the east, I would say geographically, but we look a lot more like those communities to the east. And there are some compensating factors for cost of living, that we take into consideration when we're looking at compensation for our employees in similar positions. So, Christina, at this point, we're, as we establish this new classification plan and compensation philosophy, although we only move 5, percentiles in, there was a little bit of cost associated with this, and cost was somewhat of a limiting factor. we would love to have gone up beyond that, but do you remember how much money we brought to the table? I want to say it's around $70,000 to $90,000 at the outset without having anyone change any position. So we went from the old classification table to the new classification table. Did I get that right? Is that roughly the cost, 70 to 90,000?
I think so, and we had to be very strategic when we were moving our employees over because we had such a limited amount of funding, and we had 80% of our employees who had only been receiving a cost of living adjustment. We had only been budgeting for that 80% of employees to receive 2%, and they were already being paid under market. So when we did this study and we brought positions into market value and everyone became eligible for compensation adjustments beyond just the cost of living, we had to implement our new table in 3 different phases. So we implemented based upon tenure. So we first did a group of employees who had been with the town for more than 2 years, and then between 6 months to 1 year, and then less than 6 months over a few month period. And by doing that analysis and doing it in 3 phases, we were able to fit within our budget figure. And then we had to make adjustments for future budget processes.
So that's kind of just switching tables, right? So we reclassified positions, we changed our comparable communities, we got everyone into those new grades. We made adjustments because some employees who may even have been here for a couple years, their wages at the time when we were transitioning to the new table were lower than the minimums that we found were necessary in the new table. And if I remember some of those were substantial, like greater than $5,000 for an individual employee. But it was incredibly important to all of us that we did that right at the bat and made those adjustments to get into the new table and didn't kind of drag folks along saying, this is what we should be compensating for you, but we're going to take years to get you there. We wanted to get as many people there or get everyone there right up front. So that landed us in the new table, but now we've got to talk about how folks move now, because we're not in this tenure-based system where after a year you automatically change. We're using performance that's tied to the strategic plan to now move folks through that open range between that minimum and the maximum. That minimum and maximum, both of those move when we apply a cost of living adjustment annually. So that's a factor for individual employee compensation year over year, but it's not the sole factor. So let's take a step back. What is a performance appraisal system? How does it benefit employees? What do employees see from it? And how does it benefit the town?
So our performance-based approach is a structured process to evaluate and document employee performance. It all starts with the town strategic plan, which shapes departmental goals and then sets individual goals that align with these broader objectives. So depending on your role, some employees set just one goal. For instance, employees in grades 1 through 4. Most employees set 3 goals, and all employees are evaluated on the essential functions that are within their job descriptions. We expect that there's regular check-ins between employees and supervisors throughout the course of the year. When we rolled out this new process, our number one priority was making sure that there was increased communication between employees and supervisors. So these ongoing conversations ensure that expectations are clear, progress is tracked, and employees are receiving the support that they need in order to succeed. It's also important in these conversations to provide real-time feedback to employees so that we can course correct as time goes along and make sure that any challenges are addressed early. So outside of these meetings, there's also the formal performance review process. So those are held in June. We have employees document their accomplishments, growth, performance on their goals through a self-evaluation. That self-evaluation is shared with department heads, and then they complete the performance appraisal for those employees. Overall, we're just looking to recognize the hard work of our employees, reinforce accountability across the organization, and also guide career development. So this also helps us with workforce planning because we can create development paths for employees that aids us in succession planning because we're constantly evaluating both skills and performance of our employees and developing talent internally.
Great. So we can talk about, both of you have regular meetings with me as part of our performance appraisal system. Christina, I meet with Christina every week. I meet with Taylor every 2 weeks, and we talk about everything. Like, what's been going on, in the last 2 weeks. What progress have we made towards the accomplishment of goals? As Christina said, it's as much as a communication tool with staff, and having employer or supervisor conversations as it is a performance appraisal system. So, the story that we always tell is no one should be surprised what outcome they're going to get at the end of the performance appraisal process, in April or May, because they're having weekly or bi-weekly conversations throughout the course of the entire year and making changes as necessary. Sometimes that means leaving a goal behind or adding something, but really driving communication between the supervisor and employee.
I think it helps build trust too between supervisor and employee because you're having these regular conversations, and I think that helps the employee feel comfortable in their workplace and trusted and have their supervisors there to support them, not be a reprimanding figure.
Sure.
Within Shrewsbury, which I think is special.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely comforting as an employee to know where you stand on your performance. We go through the school system being constantly graded and knowing exactly where you stand. And then you enter into the workforce, and without a performance appraisal system, you're not receiving this. So you may be wondering, am I doing a good job? So we are getting that regular recognition and feedback.
So we've talked about this a little bit, but if nothing else, just to reiterate, the big question is why? Why did we move in this direction from the previous step model?
So I would say it's not just about fair pay. It's about creating an environment where employees feel valued, motivated, and supported in everything that they're doing. We have aligned personal growth with organizational success. We are maintaining competitive wages and recognizing high performance. When all of these things work together, it positions Shrewsbury as a top employer.
So what, anecdotally or directly, what changes do you think this has led to, or has this led to, for employees and their compensation in comparison back to the old model?
So I would say for our long-standing employees, it gave them salary growth that they would have never had before, from implementation all the way through the performance appraisal system. They have been brought up to the market wages for their positions, and now they're seeing increases based upon their wages. Based upon their performance. And none of those things would have been possible before. They would have continued to fall behind with just a 2% cost of living adjustment. And then for us as an employer, it's allowed us to recruit and retain higher quality employees. So for those new employees that are coming in that kind of never knew what our old system was like, they're able to see career growth in what they're doing.
Interesting. So you've mentioned costs. We've all mentioned costs. So how's the town managed this? What challenges have there been? What frustrations? What positive? How do you respond to that? What are your thoughts?
I definitely have to credit the town because I know more than a handful of communities that have gone through a classification and compensation study and had to leave it as a document in their computer because they couldn't implement it. They were so far behind that they just had to continue with their old system, and we were met with that same challenge, and we figured out a way to get there. It wasn't easy, but we have made it. So we can go back to the point that back in 2018, 80% of our non-union staff members were at their top step and only receiving a cost of living adjustment, and our budget reflected that for non-union wages. So we had to change the way that we were budgeting in order to continue with this compensation philosophy.
So on an annual basis, supervisors and staff have to come to consensus on what goals that they're going to take on, right? Whether it's at the department level or the individual employee level. Do those department heads set compensation levels? How does that tie into the overall classification plan? And then basically how is that performance aspect and the COLA aspect of compensation set every year?
So every year, I'll start with the COLA because that's a little bit more straightforward. Every year we take existing wages with the budget process and we project what a COLA would be. So that is a hard number that we can budget for. And then during the performance appraisal system in June, we get all of the appraisals from department heads, and we provide feedback on those appraisals to make sure that they're well-rounded, that employees are receiving constructive feedback, and to make sure that even though we have 16 people across the organization providing performance evaluations, that they're all being done similarly, and that no matter what department that you work in, it's equitable across the organization. And then we take those figures and we make compensation adjustment rules that fit within our budget figure. So that may look like a meets expectation receives a 1% cost of living adjustment in addition to a COLA. So we have to do a little bit of a dance each year to figure out how we're going to fit within the budget, while also ensuring that our employees are receiving a meaningful adjustment.
So mechanically in our budget process, we are now budgeting cost of living adjustments within the individual salary and wage line items. If you're in Massachusetts, it's those first 3 budget lines within any department under personal services, the lines 1, 2, and 3. So that's where cost of living is held. And then performance compensation we centralize into the personnel board budget. So we have a pool of funding. So how do we rate employees? What do we assign? And then you mentioned someone may receive a 1% performance adjustment on top of their cost of living, but go a little deeper on that for me.
So in the past, we've used a 3-point system where we have does not meet expectations, meets expectations, and exceeds expectations. And to jump from meets to exceeds expectations is quite the leap that we ask for justification on from department heads if it's not already included in their performance review. From each year, we tweak our system a little bit based upon the feedback that we receive, whether it be the timeline of our system or increased training on it. And this year we moved from a 3-point system to a 5-point system where you could not meet expectations, need improvement, meets expectation, exceeds expectations, and outstanding. So we've heard from department heads that it was really difficult to fit employees into these different buckets, and to differentiate with a 5-point system would be beneficial to them. So this June will be our first year of deploying this.
I think it's important to talk about because, if we talk for 30 minutes about this today, it may seem really easy, but we've experienced frustrations centrally from our perspective, and they're good frustrations to have. So one of those has been our department heads want to rank their employees so well.
Yes.
They know it's tied to compensation. Everyone generally knows that in the public sector, wages tend to be lower than the private sector. There's a number of factors that go into that, both long-term and short-term. But so I think it's important just for everyone to know and reflect upon, like, this has been a major change for leadership, department heads, supervisors, as much as it's been, if not more than it's been for employees, because not only are employees setting goals and getting rated at the end, but someone's doing that work to have those conversations from the other side, provide that feedback to employees, make the annual performance rating, and then we certainly assign the dollar value or the percentage to those ratings, but the real work is being done by the department heads throughout the course of the year, and then that final. And I think from my perspective, if I had to look at a bell curve, the ratings have been skewed towards exceeds expectations rather than, meets or doesn't meet. But if you look at a compensation bell curve in a traditional private sector environment, you'd like to see the opposite happen, in that you're providing significant extra rewards to those really exceptional employees, and you're providing meaningful adjustments to those who are meeting expectations. And meeting expectations means accomplishing your goals. So what has your perspective been on that from what you've seen in department reviews and how that's played out to fairness across the ratings?
Yeah, I think we've definitely transformed what it means to be a department head, and moving to this new compensation philosophy when it comes to management and leadership skills. We're asking department heads to draw upon on those skills more now than we ever have before. And every year there's a lot of coaching that's involved throughout the course of the year when it comes to the performance appraisal system and performance management in general. We do find that year over year, we're heavily skewed with departments rating their employees as exceeds expectations. And then each year we have to go back and I review every single performance appraisal that comes in. And I ask department heads to provide us justification and to provide their employees constructive feedback in their performance review. And I do have challenging conversations every spring. If I ask department heads, 100% of your employees exceeded expectations, but if you only had 3% to divvy out amongst your staff and your budget, would you really give it out evenly to everyone just to make them think a little bit differently about it? And this year we have clearly communicated with our new 5-point rating system that our expectation is that 80% of employees will fall in that meets expectation category, and that 10 to 20% may fall into a different category, but there needs to be robust justification to go along with that.
And it's always our goal as we set that compensation pool to make sure that meets is meaningful.
Yes.
Right? So because we all know if someone's looking at their salary range, right? They get that job description and they see 50,000 to 75,000, right? Even though it's the public sector and folks quote aren't as, driven by their salary and wages as others, it's still really important, right? Things are really expensive. Everyone desires to take that family vacation, and they want to know how they get from 50 to 75 in that example. So we know that meets expectations needs to be meaningful, because it does mean that you've met those goals. Sometimes it's 3 goals on top of the essential functions throughout the course of the year. So that adjustment has to be meaningful. We think about all that, but still in that whole process, it's just been interesting to see and work with department heads and have them transform their own thinking about what they need to do throughout the course of the year. I know at the beginning of the process, more so than recently, we had anomalies where we may have a department head that we've been working with throughout the course of a year and having challenges with an individual's employee performance, and then we still get a high rating at the end, and we've had to say, no, this all matters. It all has to go together. It all has to be a similar message. We can't shy away from the hard conversation at the end when we've been having hard conversations throughout the course of the year. So there's been a lot learned by all parties. But why don't you just, before we leave this topic, tie it all back to the strategic plan for me. How do you see it all working together?
Yeah, so this really all aligns into the strategic plan, because it's kind of like our North Star in the performance appraisal process. It aligns everything that our employees are doing with our overall organizational goals. So as we know, the strategic plan focuses on improving efficiency, fostering growth, and delivering high quality services to the community. And our performance appraisal system supports these objectives by ensuring that every employee is contributing to these goals. So we have the strategic plan, which the select board supports, the town manager sets goals in alignment with the strategic plan. Each department sets goals in alignment with the strategic plan, and employee goals feed up to that. So we're all really moving in the same direction through our performance appraisal system.
Great. So it's taken a lot of work. It's really taken us well over 6 years to go from a really, legacy civil service tenure-based system where folks move through a couple of grades early in their career, and then, basically we're on a 2% cost of living adjustment. Occasionally every 5 to 6 years, there was this more intense compensation study, and a group of employees like department heads or professional technical staff may receive another benefit, but that's really a lagging way to adjust employees' compensation. And we've really taken an approach to, set employees' compensation through their own direct performance. We've tied that performance into the strategic plan, which ultimately, through the trials and tribulations of creating our first plan, was heavily, community engaged. So community sets the goals, and staff are carrying out the work on a day-to-day basis. And I'm just really pleased with all the work that's been accomplished and how we've put this system together. And we tweaked it each and every year. Yes. It's not a one and done thing. We continue to work on it. And we are going to head off into episode 45 and talk about another aspect of our transformation. I encourage folks to go ahead and listen to episode 45, because it will really round out the additional work that we've done as an employer to try to be competitive, not only in the public sector, but in the private sector, to really retain the best and brightest employees for the town of Shrewsbury. I want to take the opportunity to thank everyone for listening to this episode today. I'm Kevin Mizikar on behalf of Taylor Galusha. Thanks for listening.